The air in the Metropolitan General ER was a thick soup of controlled panic. It tasted of antiseptic, latex, and the faint metallic tang of blood. Fluorescent lights hummed a nervous, incessant tune, casting long, dancing shadows that made the weary look skeletal and the frantic look possessed. Beeps and alarms composed a discordant symphony, a constant reminder of the fragile line between life and the void. It was a place where seconds were measured in heartbeats, and decisions were weighed in ounces of flesh. Into this chaos, Nurse Alara Vance moved like a ghost, a whisper in a hurricane. She was a creature of the quiet corners, of the supply closets, and the far ends of the hallway. Her movements were hesitant, her shoulders perpetually hunched, as if expecting a blow. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe, joyless bun, and her face, pale and often drawn, was a mask of careful neutrality. She did her job with a plodding, meticulous slowness that her colleagues mistook for incompetence. They saw her fumbling with an IV catheter, her fingers seeming to betray her. They saw her drop a sterile tray, the clatter echoing far louder than the usual din, drawing scornful eyes. "Vance, for crying out loud!" The voice belonged to Maria, a senior nurse whose patience had been eroded by 20 years of 12-hour shifts. "That was the last pediatric intubation kit. Now I have to run down to Central Supply." "I'm sorry," Alara murmured, her voice barely audible. She bent to pick up the scattered plastic, her long sleeves riding up just enough to reveal the angry, puckered lines of old scars on her forearm. She quickly pulled the fabric back down, but not before a younger nurse, Chloe, saw them. Chloe's eyes held a flicker of sympathy, but she quickly looked away, busying herself with a patient's chart. To survive here, you learned not to get involved. Ilara took the scattered, now unsterile equipment to the disposal bin, her cheeks burning with a familiar shame. It was always like this. Her body, once a finely tuned instrument of precision and speed, now felt like a foreign country. The nerves in her left leg and right arm, damaged in a past she fought daily to forget, sent phantom signals and refused simple commands. The quiet, civilian world she had sought as a refuge had become its own kind of battlefield, one of quiet judgments and dismissive sighs. She was the clumsy nurse, the slow one you gave the menial tasks to, changing bedpans, stocking carts, taking vitals on stable patients. They thought her fragile, emotionally and physically. They treated her like glass, and in doing so, they made her feel shattered. The swinging doors of the ER burst open, and a wave of sound and presence followed. Dr. Alistair Finch, chief of emergency surgery, strode into the department as if he owned it. And in a way, he did. He was a man sculpted from ego and ambition, with a surgeon's brilliant mind and a tyrant's cruel heart. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his expensive suit immaculate beneath a pristine white coat. He moved with an athlete's grace, his eyes scanning the room, missing nothing, judging everything. His gaze landed on Alara, who was attempting to input patient data into a terminal. Her fingers kept hitting the wrong keys, the simple act of typing a frustrating battle against her own nervous system. Finch's lips curled into a sneer. He glided over to her, his cologne, a sharp, citrusy scent, preceding him like a warning. "Nurse Vance?" he said, his voice a low purr that still managed to cut through the noise of the ER. Every head in the vicinity turned. A Finch tirade was a spectator sport. "Are you wrestling with the alphabet? I've seen toddlers with better dexterity." A few of the junior residents chuckled nervously. Dr. Peterson, a sycophant of the highest order, gave a loud, braying laugh. "She's probably trying to spell incompetent, sir, and getting stuck." Finch smiled, basking in the sycophantic laughter. He leaned closer to Alara, invading her personal space. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the sheer force of his condescending personality. She tried to shrink into herself, to become smaller, to disappear. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you, nurse," he commanded. Slowly, Alara lifted her head. Her eyes, a muted shade of gray, met his cold, blue ones. She said nothing. Her silence seemed to infuriate him more than any protest could. "I have 100 applicants for your position," he hissed, his voice dropping so only she and those nearby could hear. Applicants who can walk and type at the same time. Applicants who don't look like they're about to burst into tears every time you ask them to find a vein. This is a top-tier trauma center, not a rehabilitation clinic for broken things. He gestured dismissively at her, his hand waving near her arm. Whatever is wrong with you, take it home. In my ER, I demand excellence. You, Vance, are the dictionary definition of mediocrity. He grabbed the chart from the console beside her. His fingers brushed her hand, and she flinched, an involuntary recoil that he noticed with a cruel smirk. Pathetic, he muttered. He turned on his heel and walked away, his audience of residents and nurses parting before him like the Red Sea. Alara stood frozen, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The blood pounded in her ears, a roaring wave of humiliation and a deeper, colder rage she had to constantly suppress. Broken things. The words echoed in the silent chambers of her mind, striking a chord of a painful, screaming memory. Fire. Metal screaming. The smell of burning fuel and blood. The weight of a friend dying in her arms. She squeezed her eyes shut for a fraction of a second, pushing the images back down into the dark box where she kept them locked away. She was here to be quiet. She was here to be safe. This was the price of peace. The scorn, the pity, the daily, grinding humiliation. It was better than the alternative. It had to be. Just as the tense atmosphere began to settle, the paramedics radioed in, their voices strained with urgency. ETA 2 minutes, Metropolitan General. We have a John Doe, male, approximately 35 years of age, found at the bottom of a collapsed stairwell, downtown construction site. Severe polytrauma. GCS of 5. Vitals are crashing. Get Trauma Bay 2 ready, Maria shouted, already in motion. Let's go, people! The bay doors slammed open, and the paramedics rushed in, their faces grim. On the gurney was a man who looked less like a person and more like a collection of brutal injuries. His face was a swollen, bruised mask, caked with dirt and dried blood. His clothes were torn and filthy. He was unconscious, a tube already down his throat, a paramedic manually bagging him. Dr. Finch reappeared, drawn by the scent of a true trauma. He glanced at the patient with an air of profound boredom. Another one for the books. Construction accident, you said? That's the call we got, the paramedic replied. But it looks weird. The injuries, some of them are too precise. Finch waved a dismissive hand. Drunks fall in strange ways. Get a full set of scans, CBC, type and cross. But don't waste the O-neg unless he's actively bleeding out on the table. He's probably uninsured. We'll stabilize and ship him to county. It was a death sentence, delivered with the casual indifference of a man swatting a fly. The patient was a problem of logistics and finance, not a human life. Vance, Maria ordered, her tone sharp. Get in there. Clean him up so we can see what we're dealing with. And try not to drop him. Ilara nodded, her face impassive. She entered the trauma bay, the curtain swinging shut behind her, providing a momentary shield from the prying eyes. Here, with the patient, it was different. There was no judgment, only need. She began her work, her movement still careful, but now with a deep, ingrained purpose. She cut away the filthy clothes, her scissors moving with practiced economy. She started to clean the grime and blood from his body with saline-soaked gauze. As she worked, she began to see what the paramedic had meant. Amidst the massive blunt force trauma, the broken ribs, the shattered leg, there were other marks. Small, deep bruises on his neck and wrists. A series of cuts on his forearms that looked like defensive wounds from a knife. This was no simple fall. This man had been in a fight. A serious one. Her gaze fell on his right shoulder. As she wiped away a smear of dirt, a shape began to emerge. A tattoo. It was small, discreet, partially obscured by a fresh abrasion, but she recognized it instantly. A trident, clutched in the talons of an eagle. SEAL team. Her breath caught in her throat. Her world, the quiet, safe world she had so carefully constructed, suddenly tilted on its axis. Her training, buried under years of civilian routine and self-imposed meekness, surged to the surface. Her mind shifted gears, the fog of her civilian persona burning away to reveal the sharp, analytical mind of a combat medic. She ignored the obvious, catastrophic injuries and started looking for the things a civilian doctor would miss. Her fingers, no longer clumsy, flew across his body, checking for signs of things Finch would never even consider. Telltale petechiae in the eyes, the faint, almond-like scent on his breath, almost completely masked by the blood, the almost imperceptible, rhythmic twitching of his left index finger. And then she saw his right hand. It was clenched into a tight fist. Gently, she worked his fingers open. They were stiff, but she was persistent. As she laid his hand flat, she saw it. His thumb was tapping, a minuscule, desperate movement against his own palm. It wasn't a random spasm. It was a pattern. ... dash 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 ... SOS. He was conscious. Trapped inside his own broken body, he was calling for help in the only way he could. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She leaned closer, her ear almost to his hand, trying to feel the vibrations more clearly. The pattern changed. ... dash ... dash ... dash ... dash ... dash. A call sign. She translated it instantly. The code is familiar to her as her own name. SPECTRE. Spectre. An operator she had heard of, a legend in the Tier 1 community. Then the tapping came again, a new word. ... dash ... dash ... dash ... ANGEL. Angel. A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over her. It was her own call sign. The one she hadn't heard in 3 years. Not since the day she had been pulled from the burning wreckage of a Blackhawk in the Hindu Kush. He knew who she was. Or at least, he was calling for who she used to be. And he was calling for her because he knew he was dying of something far worse than his injuries. Neurotoxin. A fast-acting, organophosphate-based agent. The blunt force trauma was a cover for an assassination. Standard trauma protocol, certain anesthetics, the stress of surgery, would accelerate the poison's metabolization, causing irreversible nerve damage and cardiac arrest within the hour. Finch's plan to stabilize and ship would kill him. The curtain ripped open. Dr. Finch stood there, his face a mask of irritation. "Vance, what is the holdup? Have you finished cleaning him, or are you giving him a sponge bath? We need this bay." Alara stood up, turning to face him. The timid, apologetic nurse was gone. In her place stood someone else. Her posture was straight, her gaze direct and unwavering. The gray of her eyes seemed to have hardened into polished steel. "This patient is being prepped for immediate administration of atropine and pralidoxine," she stated, her voice clear and carrying an authority that stunned Finch into silence for a moment. "He's not suffering from a fall. He's been poisoned." Finch stared at her, then threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Poisoned? Nurse, have you been reading too many spy novels? He's a vagrant who fell down a flight of stairs. Now get out of the way before your delusions compromise my patient." "He is not your patient anymore," Alara said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave. "And he is not a vagrant. He is a United States naval officer, and you are about to kill him." She moved with a speed that seemed impossible for the clumsy woman of moments before. She crossed to the crash cart, her hands flying over the drawers, pulling out the specific vials she needed. She drew up the correct dosages with fluid, practiced motions, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" Finch bellowed, his face turning a blotchy red. "That's assault. You are practicing medicine without a license. I will have you arrested." He lunged for her, intending to physically stop her. Alara didn't even look at him. She simply shifted her weight, placed her hand on the center of his chest, and pushed. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was perfectly balanced and timed. Finch, caught off guard by her strength and stability, stumbled backward, crashing into a supply cart with a loud clatter of metal instruments. He stared at her, utterly dumbfounded. The entire ER had gone silent. Everyone was watching. "Security!" Finch screamed, scrambling to his feet, his dignity in tatters. "Get security in here now! Restrain her!" Alara ignored him. She walked back to the patient's side, the syringes in her hand. She looked down at the man on the gurney. Spectre. He was one of hers. In the world she came from, you never, ever left a man behind. "Hang on, Captain," she whispered, her voice for his ears alone. "Angel is here." She found the IV port in his arm and injected the first drug, the atropine, to counteract the muscarinic effects of the poison. Then she followed with the pralidoxime to regenerate the acetylcholinesterase. It was a delicate balance. Too much would be just as fatal as too little. The doors to the trauma bay burst open. 2 burly security guards rushed in, followed by a furious Dr. Finch. "Her! Grab her!" Finch pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "She's out of her mind!" The guards hesitated for a second, confused by the scene. Alara stood calmly by the patient, making a small adjustment to his ventilator settings. She looked up at them, her expression unreadable. "Do it!" Finch shrieked. The guards moved forward. Alara didn't resist. She allowed them to take her arms, her eyes fixed on the cardiac monitor above the patient's bed. The erratic, tachycardic rhythm was beginning to slow, to even out. The premature ventricular contractions were disappearing. Her antidote was working. A small, grim smile touched her lips. "You're fired, Vance," Finch snarled, his face inches from hers. He ripped her employee ID badge from the collar of her scrubs, the plastic snapping. "You will never work in this city again. You will never work in medicine again. I will personally see to it that your nursing license is revoked, permanently. Get her out of my hospital," he spat at the guards. "And call the police. I'm pressing charges." The guards began to march her out of the trauma bay. As they passed the main desk, Maria and Chloe stared, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. Dr. Peterson looked confused, his smug expression gone. He had never seen anyone stand up to Finch. He had never seen Finch look so utterly unhinged. Alara was pushed through the main doors of the ER and out into the cold, damp night. The rain had started, a miserable drizzle that immediately began to soak her thin scrubs. The guard gave her one last shove. "Don't come back," he grunted, before retreating into the warmth of the hospital. She stood on the sidewalk, shivering, her career in ruins. She had been publicly humiliated, fired, and was about to be arrested. She had broken every rule. But as the cold seeped into her bones, she felt a strange sense of calm. She had made a choice. She had chosen the person she was over the person she was pretending to be. She had kept the faith. She had not left him behind. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the city's drone. A low, rhythmic whoomp, whoomp, whoomp that grew rapidly louder. It was a sound she knew intimately, a sound that was woven into the fabric of her nightmares and her proudest moments. The sound of heavy helicopter rotors, flying too low, too fast, over a dense urban center. She looked up. 2 sleek, black helicopters, devoid of any markings, were descending with terrifying speed toward the street in front of the hospital. They weren't police choppers or news crews. They were MH-60 Blackhawks, the workhorses of special operations. Cars screeched to a halt, horns blaring in panic as the powerful rotor wash blasted the street. The helicopters didn't land. They hovered 20 feet above the pavement, and thick, black ropes snaked down from their open doors. In a display of breathtaking skill and aggression, soldiers in full tactical gear rappelled down the ropes, their boots hitting the asphalt in perfect unison. There were 8 of them, moving with the fluid, predatory grace of apex predators. They formed a perimeter, their rifles held at a low ready, securing the area in seconds. The hospital staff and patients crowded the windows, their faces pressed against the glass in disbelief. Dr. Finch, who had come to the entrance to ensure Alara was gone, stood frozen, his mouth agape. A final figure descended from the lead helicopter. He was taller than the others, his movements radiating an aura of absolute command. He strode toward the hospital entrance, his team falling into formation behind him. He was a master sergeant, his rank visible on his collar, his face a roadmap of hard-won battles. He ignored the panicked civilians, his eyes scanning, searching. He entered the ER, his boots silent on the linoleum floor. The chaos of the emergency room died instantly. The symphony of beeps and alarms was now the only sound. The master sergeant walked directly to the main reception desk, where Maria stood, paralyzed. "I am looking for a medical professional," the sergeant said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded total attention. "Her name is Alara Vance. She may be using a call sign. Angel. Where is she?" Maria stared at him, then her eyes flickered toward the glass doors leading outside. The sergeant followed her gaze. He saw the lone, drenched figure standing on the sidewalk. He turned and walked toward the doors, his team parting to let him pass. He stepped out into the rain and approached Alara. She watched him come, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She recognized his unit patch, Joint Special Operations Command, the top of the pyramid. The master sergeant stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her drenched scrubs, her bare neck where her ID should have been. His hard expression softened with something that looked like respect and a deep, profound relief. He brought his heels together and raised his hand in a sharp, formal salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and strong despite the rain and the thumping of the rotors. "Sergeant Rex Hound Miller. General Thorne sent us. We have a compromised asset. Captain Thorne is inside. The general believed you might be here. He needs you." Alara looked at the soldier, then back at the hospital, then at the waiting helicopters. The quiet life was over. The past had come roaring back. She gave a slow, tired nod. "The patient in trauma too. I've administered the initial counteragent, but he'll need the full protocol, and it has to be done by me." "Understood, ma'am," Hound replied. He turned and gestured to two of his men. "Flank her. You have our angel." Flanked by two heavily armed commandos who moved as if they were her personal shadow, Alara walked back into the hospital she had been thrown out of just minutes before. The security guards who had manhandled her flattened themselves against a wall, their faces pale with fear. Dr. Finch was still standing in the middle of the ER, sputtering, trying to regain control. "What is the meaning of this? This is a civilian hospital. You have no authority here. I am the chief of surgery, and I demand—" His voice trailed off as Alara and her escort entered. He stared at her, his mind unable to process what was happening. The mousy, incompetent nurse he had fired was now flanked by elite soldiers. From behind the commandos, another man emerged. He was older, in his late 50s, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that did little to hide the ramrod-straight posture of a career military man. His hair was iron gray, his face was etched with lines of command and concern, and his eyes held the unmistakable weight of immense power. This was General Marcus Thorne. He didn't even glance at the soldiers or the stunned staff. His eyes were fixed on Finch. He walked forward until he was standing directly in front of the doctor. "Are you Dr. Alistair Finch?" General Thorne asked, his voice deceptively calm. "I am," Finch said, puffing out his chest, trying to reclaim some shred of his shattered authority. "And you are trespassing." "Dr. Finch," the general interrupted, his voice turning to ice. "You just fired the one person on this continent who can save my son's life. You misdiagnosed him, you dismissed him, and you ordered a course of treatment that would have been a death sentence. Due to your gross incompetence and towering arrogance, you are a threat to a mission of critical national security." The general turned his head slightly. "Sergeant." "Sir," Hound replied. "Place this hospital under lockdown. No one in or out without my express permission. Secure the patient in trauma 2. He is now under the exclusive care of this woman." He gestured to Alara. "Doctor, you are hereby relieved of all authority. Nurse Vance is now in command. You will provide her with any equipment, any medication, and any assistance she requires. If you so much as question her, I will have you arrested for interfering with a military operation and aiding the enemy. Do you understand me?" Finch's face had gone from red to a sickly, waxy white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Alara, at the woman he had belittled and humiliated. He saw no triumph in her eyes, only a cold, focused determination. The world had turned upside down, and he was crushed beneath it. Alara stepped forward. "General, I need a secure room, an operating theater if possible, and I need full access to the pharmacy. We've stopped the initial progression, but the secondary stage of the toxin will require a blood filtration process that isn't standard." "You will have it," the general said, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Whatever you need, Angel. Just save my boy." In a sanitized private operating room, secured by two commandos at the door, the true gravity of the situation became clear. General Thorne paced the observation deck above, while Alara worked on his son Jax, whose vitals had stabilized but remained precarious. "His name is Captain Jackson Thorne," the general had explained, his voice tight with a father's fear masked by a commander's composure. He was leading an operation in Eastern Europe to track the sale of a new generation chemical weapon, VX-3. It's a binary agent, undetectable until it's metabolized. The seller was a rogue element from the Russian GRU. The buyer, we weren't sure. Until now. Alara, hooking Jax up to a dialysis machine she had modified for plasmapheresis, listened intently. The buyer? A multinational corporation called Omnicorp. They have their fingers in everything, from pharmaceuticals to private military contracting. Jax's team confirmed the buy. He had the proof. Data files, transaction records. He was ambushed during exfiltration. His team was lost. He was the sole survivor. He activated his emergency beacon just before he went under. Alara paused, her hand steady as she inserted a large-bore catheter into Jax's femoral artery. Omnicorp. I've heard that name. They sit on the board of this hospital, the general said, his voice turning grim. The chairman of the board is a man named Julian Croft, a man with deep political connections and a complete lack of morality. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. So Jax being brought here wasn't a coincidence, Alara stated. It wasn't a question. No, the general confirmed. They must have tracked him. They couldn't kill him outright. It would be too suspicious. So they beat him, staged an accident, and made sure he was brought to a hospital where they had influence. They brought him here to die quietly on an operating table, his death written off as a complication of his injuries. And Dr. Finch was the instrument, Alara finished, her voice cold. His ego and his disdain for a vagrant made him the perfect pawn. He was going to do their work for them without even knowing it. Or perhaps he did know. It didn't matter. The result was the same. Meanwhile, in his now useless office, Alistair Finch was panicking. His world had been upended. The humiliation was a burning fire in his gut. A nobody nurse was now running his ER, backed by the full force of the U.S. military. His reputation was in tatters. But it was more than that. He had a secret, a rotten, corrupt secret that was about to be exposed. He frantically dialed a number on a burner phone he kept locked in his desk. The call connected after 2 rings. "It's me," Finch whispered, his voice trembling. "We have a problem. A massive problem." "I'm aware, Doctor," a smooth, chillingly calm voice replied. It was Julian Croft's executive assistant, the man who handled his dirty work. "We've been monitoring the situation. It seems your hospital has some rather unexpected visitors." "They know who he is," Finch hissed. "A general is here, his father, and they have this nurse, this woman. She knew what was wrong with him. She counteracted the agent." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That is inconvenient," the voice said mildly. "It seems a more direct approach is now required. Thank you for your update, Doctor. Your payment has been processed. I would advise you to lay low. Omnicorp values discretion." The line went dead. Finch stared at the phone, a cold sweat breaking out on his brow. He wasn't just a pawn. He was an accomplice to an assassination attempt on a military officer. The bribe that had seemed so vast and liberating just this morning now felt like a gravestone tied around his neck. Back in the OR, Alara had stabilized Jax. The plasmapheresis was slowly filtering the toxins from his blood. He was still unconscious, but his color was returning, his vital signs growing stronger with every passing minute. She worked with a silent, focused grace that held the remaining hospital staff in rapt attention. Chloe, the young nurse, was assisting her, her earlier fear replaced by a wide-eyed admiration. "I need his temperature monitored constantly," Alara instructed. "The toxin can cause severe hypothalamic instability. A sudden fever could trigger seizures." "Yes, ma'am," Chloe said, the ma'am coming out naturally. As the night wore on, a tense quiet settled over the secured floor. The commandos stood like statues in the hallways. General Thorne maintained his vigil. Alara never left Jax's side, monitoring the complex machinery keeping him alive, making minute adjustments, her focus absolute. She felt a strange sense of being herself again. The aches in her body were still there, the phantom pains a dull throb beneath the surface, but they were background noise now. The purpose, the mission, had pushed them aside. This was what she was built for. Not the quiet corners and the dismissive sighs, but this, the razor's edge. The place where skill and nerve were all that mattered. A new face appeared at the door, a janitor pushing a cleaning cart. He was nondescript, clad in the standard blue uniform, his head down. Hound, the master sergeant, gave him a cursory glance. Janitorial staff had been cleared to do their rounds. A mistake. Alara looked up from the monitors. Something was wrong. The janitor wasn't moving like a man tired at the end of a long shift. He moved with a quiet, predatory purpose. His hands, gripping the handle of the cart, were not the hands of a cleaner. They were calloused in a way that spoke of weapons training. And his eyes, which flickered up for a split second, were cold and empty. He maneuvered his cart near the room's entrance, blocking the commando's line of sight for a crucial second. In that second, he moved. With a speed that belied his appearance, he drew a silenced pistol from a hidden compartment in the cart. He wasn't aiming for the soldiers. He was aiming through the glass, into the OR, directly at Jax. But Alara was already moving. The moment she saw the flicker in the man's eyes, her body reacted, years of training overriding conscious thought. "Gun!" she shouted, not in panic, but as a sharp, clear warning. She shoved Chloe to the floor, out of the line of fire. She didn't run or hide. She moved toward the threat. The assassin fired, the silenced shot making a dull phut. The bullet starred the reinforced glass of the OR window, inches from where Jax's head lay. The commandos reacted instantly, but the assassin was already turning, bringing the weapon to bear on Alara. He was fast. She was faster. She closed the distance in 2 steps. As he swung the pistol toward her, she didn't grab for the weapon. She struck his wrist with the heel of her hand, a precise, brutal blow aimed at the radial nerve. His fingers went numb, and the pistol clattered to the floor. He grunted in pain and surprise, then swung at her with his other hand, a vicious, hooking punch. Alara flowed under the punch, her body moving with a liquid grace. She came up inside his guard, her fingers jabbing hard into the pressure point beneath his jaw. His head snapped back, his eyes rolling. As he staggered, off balance, she hooked her foot behind his ankle and drove her shoulder into his chest. He went down hard, his head cracking against the tile floor. He was unconscious before the commandos even had their rifles fully raised. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 5 seconds. Hound and his men swarmed the downed assassin, securing him. They stared from the unconscious professional hitman on the floor to Alara, who stood, breathing steadily, her hand already reaching out to check Chloe, who was staring up at her from the floor. "Are you all right?" Alara asked, her voice calm, the adrenaline already receding. Chloe could only nod, her eyes wide with a terror that was rapidly being replaced by sheer, unadulterated awe. She had just seen the mousy, clumsy nurse she felt sorry for take down a professional killer with her bare hands. General Thorne came running from the observation deck. "What happened? Report!" "Assassin, sir," Hound said, his voice filled with a new level of respect as he looked at Alara. "Neutralized. By Angel." The general looked at the downed man, then at Alara. He knew her record, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. She had saved his son's life for a second time. "This hospital is compromised," the general stated, his voice like granite. "They can get to us here. We're moving him." "Move him where?" Hound asked. "We have no secure facility in the city that isn't known to Omnicorps." Alara's mind was already working. They needed somewhere remote, defensible, with basic power and shelter. A place no one would think to look. A memory surfaced. A place she had gone to try and heal after her own injuries, before admitting defeat and moving to the city. "I know a place," she said. "There's a decommissioned ranger station in the Allegheny National Forest. It's isolated, high altitude. The roads are barely passable in good weather, and a storm is rolling in. It's off every grid. But it has a generator and basic shelter." The general looked at her, trusting her judgment completely. "Can you keep him alive during the transport?" Alara glanced back at Jax. He was stable, for now. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "But we have to move now." "Do it," the general commanded. "Hound, prep the asset for transport. We're going dark. Angel is leading the way." The escape from Metropolitan General was a masterpiece of military precision. Under the cover of the pre-dawn darkness, Jax, now on a fully mobile, battery-operated life support system jury-rigged by Alara, was moved into the back of a black, armored ambulance. Alara rode with him, monitoring his vitals, a sidearm holstered on the thigh rig Hound had insisted she wear. General Thorne rode in a lead SUV, part of a 3-vehicle convoy of nondescript black vehicles filled with his commandos. They slipped out of the city as it began to stir, melting into the commuter traffic on the interstate. They drove for hours, heading west, into the sprawling, dense wilderness of the mountains. The sky grew heavy and gray, the promised storm gathering its strength. By the time they turned off the main highway and onto a series of winding, poorly maintained state roads, a thick, wet snow had begun to fall. The ranger station was exactly as Alara remembered it, a cluster of rustic, sturdy log buildings perched on a ridge overlooking a vast, tree-choked valley. It was utterly isolated. The snow was already accumulating, erasing their tracks, cocooning them in a world of white and gray. Hound and his men immediately set to work, establishing a defensive perimeter, setting up motion sensors, and getting the heavy-duty generator running. They moved Jax into the main cabin, into a room with a large stone fireplace. Alara re-established her makeshift ICU, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors a stark contrast to the howling of the wind outside. General Thorne stood by the window, watching the snow fall, his phone long since having lost its signal. "Omnicorp won't give up," he said, his voice low. "Croft can't afford to let Jax live. He'll throw everything he has at us." "They have to find us first," Alara replied, checking the infusion rate on Jax's IV. "This storm is our best defense." For a day, she was right. The storm turned into a full-blown blizzard, dumping 2 feet of snow and cutting them off completely. The small group settled into a tense routine. Alara tended to Jax, whose condition was slowly but steadily improving. He was still unconscious, but the poison was almost entirely filtered from his system. Now it was a matter of letting his body heal from the trauma. The commandos maintained their watch, rotating shifts, their professionalism a quiet, reassuring presence. On the second night, Jax's eyes flickered open. Alara was at his side instantly. His gaze was unfocused, confused. "Easy, Captain," she said softly. "You're safe." He blinked, trying to focus on her face. "Angel?" he rasped, his voice rough from the intubation tube. "I'm here," she said, a wave of relief washing over her. "You were compromised. We got you out." "The data," he whispered, his hand weakly trying to move. "The drive." "We'll worry about that later," she said. "Right now, you need to rest." His eyes closed again, but his breathing was deeper, more natural. He was coming back. The victory felt profound. But their sanctuary was about to be violated. Julian Croft was a man of immense resources and zero restraint. Using satellite thermal imaging and tracking the general's last known vehicle movements, his private mercenary team, a ruthless outfit of ex-Special Forces soldiers called the Scourge, had narrowed their search area. The blizzard that had been their shield now became their trap. Hound was on watch when the first motion sensor pinged. It was a soft alert on his wrist-mounted tactical device. He froze, his eyes scanning the swirling snow beyond the cabin's perimeter. Another sensor tripped, then a third. They weren't animals. The pattern was coordinated. They were being probed. "Contact," he whispered into his comms, his voice tight. "Perimeter breach, Sector 3. All teams to battle stations. Silent approach." The commandos moved without a sound, melting into defensive positions they had already prepared. Alara heard the single word over the comms unit they had given her. Her blood ran cold. She immediately moved to Jax's side, drawing her sidearm. She stood between him and the door, her body a shield. The attack came without warning. Not a noisy assault, but a silent, deadly infiltration. A window pane on the far side of the cabin shattered, and a black-clad figure rolled through, rifle already up. One of Hound's men took him down with a suppressed 3-round burst. Then all hell broke loose. The blizzard outside was suddenly alive with muzzle flashes. Bullets ripped through the log walls of the cabin, sending splinters flying. The roar of automatic weapons fire was deafening. The mercenaries were well-armed, well-trained, and they were attacking from all sides. "They're trying to suppress an advance!" Hound yelled over the gunfire. "Hold your positions! Make every shot count!" General Thorne was in the main room with 2 commandos, laying down covering fire from a window. "Angel, status on the asset," he shouted. "He's stable, but we can't move him," Alara yelled back. The beeping of the monitors was now frantic, Jax's heart rate spiking from the concussive noise. A grenade exploded just outside the cabin, shaking the entire structure. The lights flickered and died as the generator took a stray round. They were plunged into darkness, save for the strobing flashes of gunfire from outside and the red emergency lights on Alara's medical equipment. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The commandos were good, but the scourge was relentless. One of Hound's men went down, a cry of pain quickly silenced. Then another. The perimeter was shrinking. The enemy was closing in. The main door of the cabin splintered, then burst inward, ripped from its hinges by a sledgehammer. 2 mercenaries stormed in, their weapons sweeping the room. General Thorne and his men engaged them, the close-quarters firefight a chaotic, terrifying dance of death. Alara knew they wouldn't be able to hold them off for long. The room where she and Jax were had a second door, leading to a small, wood storage shed attached to the back of the cabin. It was their only chance. "General!" she yelled into her comm. "I'm moving him! Back door!" She disconnected the most critical pieces of monitoring equipment, packing them into a medical bag. Jax was conscious now, his eyes wide with adrenaline. He was weak, helpless. "Sorry about this," she said, and with a grunt of effort, she hauled him from the bed, draping his arm over her shoulder. He tried to help, his legs unsteady. They staggered toward the back door. A mercenary kicked in the door to their room. He saw them, a cruel smile on his face. He raised his rifle. Jax, seeing the threat, reacted on pure instinct. He shoved Alara toward the door. "Go!" he croaked. The mercenary fired. The bullet, meant for Alara, slammed into Jax's shoulder. He cried out, collapsing to the floor. A primal rage, cold and pure, surged through Alara. She didn't run. She turned. The mercenary was advancing, his rifle ready to finish the job. She still had her sidearm. She raised it, her stance perfect, her grip steady, the years of training a solid foundation beneath the terror. One shot. A single, precise shot. She didn't aim for the chest, protected by body armor. She aimed for the head. The crack of the pistol was deafening in the small room. The mercenary dropped like a stone, his helmet not enough to stop the round at this range. She had just killed a man to protect her patient. There was no time to process it. She grabbed Jax, hauling him to his feet. He was bleeding heavily from the new wound. "Hound!" she screamed into the comms. "We're taking heavy fire! We need evac! Now!" Just as despair began to set in, a new sound joined the cacophony of the firefight. It was the familiar, beautiful whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of Black Hawk rotors. Reinforcements. Hound must have hit his emergency beacon. 2 gunships appeared out of the swirling snow, their miniguns opening up on the mercenary positions. The tide turned instantly. The overwhelming fire from the air ripped through the enemy ranks, turning their coordinated attack into a panicked retreat. The battle was over as quickly as it had begun. Hound, the general, and 3 other surviving commandos secured the cabin. Alara was already on the floor, her hands working furiously to stop the bleeding from Jax's shoulder. The next morning, the world was a different place. The sun was out, glinting off the fresh, pure white snow. The scene was surreal, a tranquil winter wonderland littered with the grim aftermath of a brutal firefight. A fleet of military vehicles had made its way up the mountain. Jax, stabilized once more by Alara, was loaded into a medical helicopter. General Thorne stood with Alara as they watched it take off. "The data drive was stitched into the lining of his jacket," the general said quietly. "We have it. We have everything we need to bring down Croft and Omnicorps." He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a gratitude so profound it was humbling. "Twice, you saved him. You're a warrior, Major Vance." He used the rank she hadn't held in 3 years. The public act of the drama was about to begin. News crews from every major network were gathered in the main lobby of Metropolitan General. Julian Croft, the billionaire CEO of Omnicorps, stood at a hastily assembled podium, Dr. Finch at his side. Croft was smooth, polished, the picture of corporate authority. Finch looked haggard, a puppet propped up for one last performance. "And we are here today to set the record straight," Croft was saying, his voice resonating with false sincerity. "This hospital, a pillar of our community, was targeted by a violent criminal gang. In the ensuing chaos, a disgruntled and mentally unstable former nurse, Alara Vance, kidnapped a patient and caused untold damage. Finch stepped up to the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. "Miss Vance has a history of emotional problems," he lied, his voice reedy. "She was fired for gross incompetence and endangerment of a patient. Her actions were those of a deeply disturbed individual. We are cooperating fully with the authorities to bring her to justice." The reporters were shouting questions, a frenzy of cameras flashing. Croft was about to take the podium again when the main entrance doors to the hospital swung open. Silence fell. General Marcus Thorne entered, dressed in his full Class A uniform, his chest a formidable display of medals and ribbons. He was followed by a team of military police, and behind them, pushing Captain Jackson Thorne in a wheelchair, was Alara Vance. She was no longer the mousy, invisible nurse. She wore her own decorated military service uniform, which one of the general's aides had procured for her. The Distinguished Flying Cross was pinned above her other medals. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders. Her limp was noticeable, but she walked with an unshakable confidence, her head held high. The scars on her arm were visible below her rolled-up sleeve, no longer a source of shame, but a testament to her survival. The press went into a collective meltdown. Cameras swiveled, reporters gasped. Croft and Finch froze, their faces turning to masks of horror. General Thorne walked directly to the podium, gently but firmly moving Croft aside. "My name is General Marcus Thorne of the United States Army. You've just heard a series of lies from these two men." His voice boomed through the lobby, a voice accustomed to commanding armies. "The man these two tried to have murdered," he said, gesturing to his son, "is not a random patient. He is Captain Jackson Thorne, a decorated officer of the United States Navy SEALs. He was not kidnapped by a disgruntled nurse. He was saved by a hero." He turned his gaze to Alara, and the entire room followed. "This is former Air Force flight nurse Alara Vance, call sign Angel. 3 years ago, her helicopter was shot down in Afghanistan. With a shattered leg and shrapnel in her arm, she pulled 3 wounded soldiers from the burning wreckage before it exploded, shielding them with her own body. For this, she received the Distinguished Flying Cross. She left the service not because of emotional problems, but because of the honorable wounds she sustained protecting others. She came here seeking peace, and instead found corruption and cowardice." He then turned his full, wrathful attention on Finch. "Dr. Finch did not fire a hero for incompetence. He took a bribe from that man." He pointed a damning finger at Croft. "To ensure my son died on his operating table. To cover up Omnicorp's trafficking of illegal chemical weapons with our nation's enemies." "That's a lie! An outrageous accusation!" Croft sputtered, but his face was ashen. "Is it?" the general thundered. He held up a small digital recorder. "Then perhaps you can explain this." He pressed play. Finch's panicked, whining voice filled the silent lobby. "They know who he is. A general is here, his father, and they have this nurse. She counteracted the agent." The recording of Finch's call to Croft's aid echoed through the hall, an irrefutable confession. Finch let out a strangled cry. No, it's not true. She's a nobody, a clumsy, broken fool," he shrieked as the military police moved in, grabbing his arms. He struggled, his carefully constructed world vaporizing around him. "I am Dr. Alistair Finch. I am the chief of surgery." He was dragged away, weeping and screaming, a pathetic caricature of the arrogant man he had once been. The military police then moved to a stunned Julian Croft, cuffing him as his lawyers began to shout. The lobby was in an uproar, but in the middle of it all, a single sound began. Chloe, standing at the edge of the crowd, started to clap. It was a tentative sound at first. Then Maria, the veteran nurse, joined in, her applause strong and steady. Soon, other nurses, doctors, and even patients joined in, a rising tide of applause directed at Alara. They were not just clapping for the hero on the podium, they were clapping for the quiet, bullied woman they had misjudged. A collective apology and a celebration of her vindication. Alara stood tall, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of release. The weight she had carried for 3 long years had finally been lifted. Later, in a quiet office away from the chaos, General Thorne faced Alara. "The President sends his personal thanks," he said. "Omnicorp is being dismantled as we speak. Croft is singing like a canary to avoid treason charges. He paused, his expression turning serious. The military is forming a new unit. A small, elite, rapid response medical team designed to support Tier 1 assets in the field. It needs a commander, someone who can build it from the ground up, someone who understands both medicine and combat, someone they can trust. He looked her directly in the eye. The commission is waiting for your approval, Major Vance. We want you to lead it. It wasn't just a job offer. It was a homecoming. It was a chance to be whole again, to merge the two halves of her life, the warrior and the healer. No more hiding, no more pretending. I accept, General, she said, her voice firm. The final scene was not in a hospital, but on a windswept tarmac of a military airbase. Alara, dressed in a crisp new flight suit, walked with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. Her limp was still there, a quiet reminder of the price she had paid, but it no longer defined her. She walked toward a waiting C-130 Hercules, its engines already whining. Captain Jax Thorne was there to see her off. He was on his feet, his arm in a sling, but his eyes were clear and full of admiration. He gave her a slow, genuine smile. "Heard you're getting the band back together, Major," he said. "Someone has to be there to patch you guys up when you get into trouble, Captain," she replied, her own smile easy and confident. "Glad it's you," he said, his voice sincere. "See you in the field, Angel." "See you in the field, Spectre," she said. She turned and walked up the ramp into the cavernous belly of the aircraft. She didn't look back at the quiet life she was leaving behind. She was looking forward, toward the noise, the challenge, the purpose. She was no longer a broken thing in need of rehabilitation. She was Major Alara Vance, and she was going home. The ramp closed, sealing her in with the roar of the engines, a promise of the future. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content, and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The story of Major Alara Vance is a powerful reminder that true strength often lies hidden beneath a quiet exterior. It teaches us never to judge a book by its cover, as the people we dismiss or underestimate may possess incredible courage and skill that we cannot see. Her journey shows that integrity and doing the right thing, even at great personal cost, will ultimately lead to vindication and triumph. The arrogance and cruelty of figures like Dr. Finch are always built on a fragile foundation, while the quiet competence and moral fortitude of a hero like Alara are indestructible. It's a lesson that character, not status, is the true measure of a person. What would you have done if you were in Alara's shoes? Would you have risked your career and freedom to save a patient against a direct order from a powerful superior? Let me know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts and opinions. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button, as it really helps the channel grow. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload from us. We have new stories coming out all the time that we know you'll love. Thank you for watching. Have a nice rest of your day.